All right, guys. I hope you're being good today. This is my first time using a screencast, so I'm going to try my best to look at the camera and not look at the screen like I'm doing now. We're going to try and get through 3 days of notes in one, the last behavioral ecology notes, and then we're going to get started on population ecology. That's where it kind of gets into the meat of the stuff that's going to be on the test. If you'll turn to day 8 notes, it's titled Behavioral Ecology Part 3. We'll go ahead and get started. Behavioral ecology is going to hit on large groups of animals and how they interact together. You can see that there's a list of social behaviors that we kind of hit on: aggression, competition, courtship. That's the fun one because you get to see some mating, and how cooperation plays a part. Lots of the higher level organisms, like your mammals and things like that, they're going to do a lot more cooperation than your lower level organisms. Hershey and Chase, you should recognize that name. They did some experiments with cooperative behavior for animals working as a team in order to better them over some other organisms, and they had some really interesting research. Agonistic behaviors are probably the most fun to watch because you can see animal fights, these rams butting heads, or even the one I have on here at the top right here that I can't play for you because it doesn't hold the sound, is a hippo fight. Hippos actually use this dominance hierarchy that's referred to in your notes. They only have one male that has the rights to every single female, and so if you lose the fight, you don't get to mate, which kind of is the whole point of being an animal, is passing on your genetics. So if you lose, it's really unfortunate because you're done, unless you can beat someone out for another spot that has another harem of women. You see this pecking order kind of idea with lots of different animals, that this alpha male or alpha female gets access to all of the individuals for mating, or all of the resources, or all of whatever there may be there to be pined for. So it's a pretty substantial idea within the animal kingdom. You're going to see some territoriality between animals. That's lions protecting their packs, or protecting a good spot of land. I believe the one I show at the end, or the one I have for you at the end if you want to click on it at home, is baboons, and how baboons kind of protect their limited resources and fight to the death sometimes. Courtship is a big one. That's probably the one people like to see the most. Oh, I guess it's salamanders, not baboons. I have baboons in my notes, but that's all right. Courtship is a pretty fun one. You can see I have lots of different options here. The ring-tailed lemur, they actually mate on top of a cactus. It's kind of neat. If you'll think of when you try to attract a female, if it was just simply based on smell, how many girls would actually want to date you? That's kind of the life of a ring-tailed lemur. If you don't have a good smell, they don't want any part of you. The sage grouse is pretty cool. If you've never seen a sage grouse, they're pretty unique. They have these, they look like giant yellow boobs, to be perfectly honest, but they are these large projections from their chest that are filled with air. It's actually part of their pharynx and larynx, and they can kind of bounce these big balloons and make this doing noise, and it's whoever has the most attractive sound that can attract the mate. So if you want to watch that one, that's pretty interesting. And then we get into these 3 down here. These are our 3 different types of courtship. You're going to see that there are benefits and disadvantages to each one. We'll start with promiscuity. I think I might have mentioned cuttlefish in class. Cuttlefish are very promiscuous. You're either going to have your large jock males that win the female just by sheer presence, and you're going to have your small sneaky males that pretend to be women by their coloring and how they hold their tentacles up close to their face like a woman does, and they kind of sneak in under the big jock's nose and mate with the female. So the female ends up mixing this sperm within her eggs, and she gets some males out of her litter. I don't know if it's called a litter, but out of her offspring that are the large jocks, and then you get some that are the small sneaky individuals, because it pays to have either one. You still get to reproduce. So she doesn't get to pick and choose, but she doesn't turn either one away. So that promiscuous is many mating with many. You get a lot of fitness out of that because you get a lot more genetic mixing. However, the disadvantage is they usually abandon their young. They don't do a lot of parental care, which means the life expectancy of the young is going to be pretty low. So if you had to consider the type of fertilization or the type of species this would be, if you don't have a large life expectancy, it's usually going to be individuals that have large amounts of offspring. They're going to give birth to hundreds of individuals at a time. It won't be things like humans, although you do see some of this in human relationships. The next one on our list is the monogamous individuals. That's the Clark grebe. Excuse me. That's a bird that mates with one other mate for life, so one mating with one. If we go back to our advantages and disadvantages, you'll see that there's not a lot of genetics mixing there, so you're going to have less relative fitness. However, lots of times with these individuals, because you're getting such a small group of offspring and you don't have very good fitness, you're going to invest a lot more parental care in these individuals, into your offspring, so that you can make sure that they last a little bit longer. The last one is polygamous relationships. Excuse me. Polygamous relationships is one mating with a lot. You see this in some human relationships, but not too often. There are also, lots of you are probably thinking one man with lots of females, but it can actually go the other way. Can anyone think of the example where it's one female with lots of males? Hopefully somebody said bees. There is a queen bee, and that female has the rights to mate with anyone she wants. In polygyny, if you remember, it's kind of like having a harem. You see this in baboons, they have a harem. You see this in lots of the primate relationships, because they tend to follow this path, no matter how unfair it seems. The funniest thing that you can see in animal behavior is how animals communicate with each other. You see a little bit of altruism. Altruism is the ability to kind of put yourself at a disadvantage for the better of the group. We see this in bees with all the worker bee populations. And bees actually communicate in a really odd way. You wouldn't think of bees as being very good dancers, but they are actually very great dancers. And you can see, here's the two patterns that they will make. They'll kind of circle around and then wiggle down the middle, and then circle around and wiggle down the middle. And that tells you about food that might be a little bit further away. The direction that they wiggle and the speed that they wiggle tells you how far and how fast to almost said swim, to fly. And then this round dance of the bees actually tells you what food that's a little bit closer. So when they get back to the hive, they'll do this dance for all their buddies, and then all their buddies will be able to find the food that they just found and bring it back for the group to eat. So kind of interesting. Go ahead and switch to population ecology part 1. Here we go. We're going to get through it. All right, so population ecology is always dealing with a population. So first we need to define what a population actually is. These are the same individuals in the same place at the same time, and they have to be reproducing. They have to show signs that they're actually reproducing. If they're just hanging out together, it doesn't count. So they have to be all in the same place at the same time and wanting to actually reproduce. The women have to be on board is what I'm trying to mean. The population ecology is really based on density, how many individuals are in a specific place at a specific time. You'll see a lot of that here. Human populations have skyrocketed lately. We're getting close to over 7 billion here in the next few years. And you can see based on our chart here that we're doubling every couple years. I mean, we're getting up there. Not doubling, excuse me, but we're going straight up. So we are definitely at exponential growth at this point. You'll see on your notes that they talk about the mark recapture method. That was a question on the test. It's pretty self-explanatory. They've got the equation laid out there for you. Being able to work through that is a big one. So if you can kind of give yourself some fake data and work through it and see if you can figure it out, that would be great. We do have some math questions on this unit, but we'll get back to those whenever I get back to class. Patterns of density within a population. You can see that there are sometimes clumped groups. We have uniform groups and we have random groups. Now you need to consider the environment that they would be in when you think of this. What do you think would lead to this clumped pattern? Well, probably, just like in humans, there's some type of resource that's needed in these spots, but not in these open areas. For a random or for a uniform pattern, you're going to have good dispersal of resources. Therefore, you don't need anybody kind of clumping together. And then you've got this random assortment, which means there's no apparent reason. They just kind of found a place to live and they live there. So that's like trees and things like that. Anywhere they can live, they will. So this is probably the most unique situation. You've got to find out why we've got these major clumps in certain places. This one just tells you that the uniform or the environment is pretty favorable and everybody's pretty happy where they're at. how to calculate life cycles and birth and death. That's definitely part of your homework tonight. All of the individuals coming in, you're either going to have births into the population or you're going to have immigration with an I. That's individuals coming in from an outside source. And then you have the individuals that are leaving a population. That would be through death or predation, any type of death. Predation is definitely death. But you can also have death just from old age or disease or sickness. But you also have individuals that will leave a population by choice, and that's immigration with an E for exit. So, sorry, my cat did some move over here just now. So you'll see this in the deer and wolf predation sheet that you'll do at the end of class. You'll have to calculate some of these variables and show the rate of change over time and kind of predict what you think would happen. Now, life tables are going to show you a specific age over time within a group. If you look here, we've got ground squirrels. These are the females and these are the males. So just glancing at this without actually looking at any of these titles and seeing what's going on, you've got age over here. What can you tell about the males and the females? Hopefully you noticed that the males die way before the females do. Just about 4 or 5 years, which when life expectancy is only just over 1 year, you have a problem there because the males are dying off way faster. So you might have an issue as to why this might be happening. Someone might hypothesize and start to form an experiment, start to do some investigative observation, and see if they can find out. Survivorship curves is kind of the big main point in this set of notes. You've got to understand how energy investment is going to play a part into how the actual animal is going to survive. So our first type of survivorship curve is a type 1. It's this red line up here. If you can look at this, you've got max lifespan down at the bottom versus number of survivors. So right here at the beginning of the red line, you've got lots of survivors at a very young age. So lots of young. If you go about halfway through, you've still got lots kind of in this median age. And then you've got very little that live to old age. So what that tells you about this group is they have a really, really favorable environment if they can get this far along without dying. It also tells you that there's probably a lot of parental care here at the beginning to get them through that stage where they can't take care of themselves, which means if there's a lot of parental care, there's also a lot of energy that's invested in these individuals. It turns out that in nature, you often have individuals that do internal fertilization that are going to fall on the survivorship curve number 1, because internal fertilization lowers your number of offspring. Therefore, you can give that high level of parental care, and your life expectancy will go up. The second type of survival curve is this black, always decreasing line here. These individuals are going to be somebody's food, but not the bottom of the food chain. They're going to fall somewhere in the middle. They're probably a food source. They do have decent parental care because you do have some that live to middle age and very few that live to old age, but you do have some parental care. So these kind of cross the line between those higher level internal fertilization organisms and those lower level, higher level external fertilization individuals and those lower level internal fertilization people, because you may have large litters here, but lots of them are going to get eaten by the time they're middle-aged. The last curve we have is this third blue curve here. If you look at the number of individuals we start with, we still start with a ton, but not very many of them make it to middle age. So that should tell you, first of all, they're getting picked off. They're at the bottom of a food chain somewhere. They're usually in a very harsh environment. I always think of Nemo on this one because the eggs are at the bottom. That's somebody's food right off the bat. So you're going to have lots of your individuals die right at the beginning. Oftentimes that's because they are externally fertilizing individuals. Most of those live in the water. Not all of them do, but most of them do. And they're going to have very, very large offspring populations, so hundreds to thousands at a time. Therefore, there is very little parental care because you can't take care of 1,000 kids at a time. And so lots of them die off. You hope that maybe a handful of them can live to middle age or later. This is a big deal. Understanding this one slide is huge, that you'll see this again for sure So please make sure that you understand how this plays a part into parental care, how it plays a part into offspring population size, how it plays a part into what type of environment these individuals would be in, what individuals and what animals might apply to the 1, the 2, and the 3, how that plays a part into food chains. This is a big chunk of ecology right here, just in this one slide. The last thing that is on your list here is a reproductive table. These are always referred, or always, my animals are awesome. These are always referred to in terms of females because, unfortunately, guys, you don't matter when it comes to reproductive success. When a population starts to lose its number of females, that starts to get really scary for extinction purposes, because if you don't have a female to reproduce, it doesn't matter how many males you have. You always just need one male. One male can do the job for everybody, but you can't just have one female, because then you have gestation time and things, and that'll put the woman out of commission, and it causes major problems. So understanding how this would apply in a scenario and how to read these is really important, but knowing that the females are way more important in a group is just obvious, first of all, but is very, very important. All right, last one. I think I'm doing all right. Longest one, unfortunately. Life histories are very important when it comes to animals. These are part of your important concepts from previous units, knowing that DNA creates traits, and those traits are inherited from offspring, or from older individuals in the population. Life histories are big. It tells you kind of how an organism came to be and how they're going to continue on. The first type we have is similarity. This is referred to and kind of references the Big Bang. You get one-time reproduction, and it's a huge number of offspring. We see this in salmon. We see this in the century plant that you see on your screen. And the one I see the most commonly, and I've been most familiar with, is an octopus. An octopus is going to lay eggs one time, and then over the course of the 6 months gestation period that it takes for those eggs to mature and become offspring, the octopus is dying. She sits there and blows water over the eggs to give them the dissolved oxygen and nutrients that they need, but then by the time they start hatching, she's dead. So it's kind of unfortunate. It's kind of a pretty touching story that the mom just passes away because she's taking care of her babies, but it's also kind of sad. They give this huge investment just to pass on their genetics. The other type is called idioparity. This is repeated reproductions over time. This is going to be most of your organisms on the planet. It means that they probably have a pretty good environment if they can continue to reproduce and invest the time and energy into reproduction. So you see this way more often than you see this similarity here. And you can see there's a couple different types, but compared to similarity, it's definitely a little easier to get this far. All right, growth curves. Population growth is a big deal. You're going to see this a little bit in your homework as well. Exponential growth means that the growth is skyrocketing all at once. This is when we start to get to our different species. We have R species and we have K species. R selected species you're going to think of kind of as rapid growth. They're going to be density independent. If you remember from 9th grade when you learned that term, density independent means it does not matter how many individuals they are. It is independent of the number of individuals. It is all based on resources. How much food is available, how many predators are present, how much space there is to live. This all has to do kind of with the carrying capacity of an environment. Carrying capacity is how many individuals can this environment carry or sustain through a certain amount of time. In our selected species, an exponential growth will always show, I'm pointing at the screen and you can't see it, will always show a J curve with this large upswing here at the end. This environment usually is going to have unlimited resources, so you don't have anyone that's bothering with looking for food or trying to figure out how to get their next meal or where to live, things like that. They're going to have plenty of space, plenty of food, not a lot of predation, and these are going to be perfect opportunities for growth. We see this a lot with pioneer species. Pioneer species are the mosses and the lichens that kind of come in and start to inhabit an area that maybe, the example they give you in your notes is Hawaii, when it just started as a volcano and volcanic rock. You see this again whenever you have a forest fire that comes through and wipes out an area. The first things that are going to grow are mosses and bacteria and lichens, and then eventually you start to get some grasses and small shrubs. And as those start to develop in an area, you can start to get trees and things like that. But it's all a progression. I think I show you that progression here. Yes, so it started as volcanic rock. You start to get lichens and mosses. Lichens are a mixture of fungus and protists together, algae and fungus that live together. You see this a lot on the sides of trees. They're kind of feathery, light greenish gray. You've seen them a lot, I'm sure you have. And then you start to get your small grasses, and then eventually shrubs, and then trees, and then you get this beautiful oasis. If you've never been to Hawaii, you need to go because it's awesome. Then you get intrinsic growth, which is your growth when the population is growing so fast it's almost doubling every year. This is what you get with this straight up and down line. So not this J here at the bottom, but once you start getting way up here at the top, that's your intrinsic growth. Now, logistic growth is going to be a little bit different. Instead of doing this big J that we get with exponential growth, you're going to get an S. And the end of the S is probably the most important. This logistic growth is going to be with species that are called K selection species. K means they're going to hover right there at the carrying capacity for a specific environment. Remember, carrying capacity is how many individuals can fit in that one space at that one time and actually be successful. These are considered density dependent, meaning there are limited resources of some kind, whether it be space or food, or there's a predation pressure that's there. It depends on how many individuals are present. If we only have 100, we might be able to support 100 deer in a forest, but if we have 200, some of those deer are going to have to die off, which is where we get this flattening out right around that carrying capacity. These are definitely dependent on numbers because you've got that limited resource problem. It's going to produce this S curve. It can also give you, if you remember back from when we first started talking about these during hormones, a positive feedback loop. Because if you continue to grow, the environment is going to start to break down. Once you get over, you're going to have this lag time. So you'll get over carrying capacity. That's when people have to die out to get us back down here. But you can cause damage to the environment over time if you get over carrying capacity for too long. That can then cause more individuals to die, and then carrying capacity actually drops because you've damaged the environment, which then, if you're still above it, you'll drop again and then cause more damage, and it just kind of continues on and on. So it can be a big problem. Again, they did one with paramecium in the lab and to show you exactly how many can be supported with the amount of food that's present over amount of days. This is a really good one to watch. It's Bozeman's R and K selection. I've put it here. It'll be on my blog, but you can watch it at home if you'd like, or look it up as soon as we're done with this PowerPoint. This is the last thing we're going to talk about. It's called the extinction vortex. Pretty scary name. Once individuals reach a small population, we start to have interbreeding and genetic drift. And this is a big problem because if the population is so small that we get interbreeding, we're going to stop adding in new genetics. And if you have the same genetics over and over again, you lose that variation that's so successful in a population. When you do that, your fitness depletes and your ability to adapt to an environment depletes, which means you start to get infertile and you start to get sterile individuals, and people start to die off quicker because one disease or one virus may come in and be able to wipe everyone out if we all have the same genetics. So your population continues to get smaller, and then you do this all over again. And it's really hard to knock a population out of this, to get an organism out of this extinction vortex. So once this happens, it's kind of done. So we try to avoid this at all costs if we can. This is when we start putting individuals in captivity so that we can try and guide their breeding. But once your population's small enough, it's kind of hard to get around that. All right, well, now it's time to work on your homework. I'm going to show you an example real quick how it works. If I can pull it up here. All right, so this is the sheet you've got. The sub can pass it out in just a minute. Your scenario is right up here at the top. It tells you what they've done and what's about to happen and why they did it. You've got to work through this column right here, do a little math. build me a chart. You'll notice that the number of deer is listed on one side and the number of wolves is listed on the other. So you actually have two axes that you have to worry about. Your year is here at the bottom. It says, please give me 2 different colors. So your deer needs to be in pink and your wolves need to be in blue, or however you want to do it. I would prefer a line graph because you can see it a little better as opposed to a bar graph. Then you have some analysis questions. Please be sure to actually do what it says. If you are to describe, that means you need to give me some explanation. Okay, give me some descriptive words. What is happening to the population? Then predict. Tell me what you think is going to happen. Down here, you've got this big, long mess of information. That's not what I want you to answer. This is the part I want you to answer. So skip down to the bottom after you've read all of this. These are kind of thought-provoking ideas right here. These aren't the questions I want you to answer, but you can highlight those as you state your opinion and explain your belief. Okay, when you defend it, you can use some of this and use your beliefs on those. All right, this is due Monday. Have a fabulous afternoon. Have a good weekend. Be safe, and I will see you Monday.